Hello, and welcome to another video lecture for Mr. Mosier's 8th grade U.S. History class. This is one of several dealing with our topic of World War I. World War I was called at the time the war to end all wars, which is a little bit of a sad irony because this particular conflict will kind of lay the foundation for a lot of the conflicts of the 20th century. Obviously, there's a World War I, so there will be a World War II. At the end of World War II, we'll have something called the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, which will lead to conflicts in Africa and Asia and the Middle East and Central and South America. So even though this is known as the war to end all wars, it doesn't do that. It's going to actually end up leading to a lot of conflicts. Traditionally, World War I is not covered a great deal in most U.S. history courses just because this is more of a world history topic. America will get involved just at the very end of World War I. But we're going to spend a little bit of some time on it just so you know a little bit of the background and backstory of what brought about World War I. And then, of course, the American involvement in World War I and kind of its significance and importance, and also how World War I will set the stage to bring us into World War II, which will have a much greater significant impact in American history. The readings for this particular video lecture comes from the textbook from pages 720 to 724. Guiding questions will be dealing with the causes of World War I. There's an acronym called M.A.N.I.A, military, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and assassination. So M.A.N.I.A is just kind of an easy way to remembering the causes of World War I. I always like to try to bring in family personal connections. I did actually have a great uncle who served in World War I. He actually was killed in France in a battle on October 13th, 1918, which is really close to the end of World War I, so it just about made it. I remember as a kid growing up going to the local cemetery on Memorial Day and seeing the flags planted at his gravestone, and so he was my great uncle, someone that I did not ever get to meet because he died well before I was ever born, but someone I still kind of tie in to make a note of, this is a real event. This did have impacts on real people. So what caused this conflict called World War I? The acronym of M.A.N.I.A is oftentimes used to describe this conflict. And so we're going to be looking at those definitions here. The main causes of World War I, again, this is somewhat controversial, and historians don't necessarily agree what are the major causes. There's some debate among historians, which is pretty typical with historians. That's kind of why they look at these issues and they analyze the issues. But usually we kind of look at these main areas of militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, and assassination. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, and assassination all played some kind of role in the lead-up of World War I. We're going to start here first with assassination. The assassination, we did this activity in class over the field trip of the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir apparent, meaning he was next in line to become the ruler of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. He was visiting a territory in Sarajevo, which was under the control of the Austrian government. He was there to kind of inspect the political leaders as well as the military installations that were there. He was there with his newly wed wife. They were kind of on their honeymoon. What a great honeymoon, right, to go to Sarajevo and inspect the troops and see the city officials. When they arrived by train to Sarajevo, they took a motorcade of cars towards City Hall, and as they went along this route on this road, there were a group of assassins that belonged to a group known as the Black Hand. They were a kind of a terrorist organization that were wanting to have independence for Sarajevo and Serbia. And so they had planned to kill the Archduke, and at first their first plan was to throw a grenade. So one of the assassins along the kind of the motorcade route, which was very well publicized. I mean, everybody knew they were coming and knew exactly where they were to be along the route. And so these assassins planned and didn't have much difficulty in planning and knowing where to be. The first assassin throws a grenade at the motorcade, misses. The grenade goes off and ends up injuring a different vehicle of the motorcade. The assassin flees, tries to take cyanide, a poison, to kill himself. It's bad cyanide, doesn't work. He ends up jumping off a bridge into this river, which is not very full of water at the time, and so he doesn't drown either. So he eventually gets arrested. The motorcade continues. The Archduke is not harmed. There's a few people harmed in his group, but he himself and his wife are not injured. They go to City Hall over here where he gives a speech. He's very angry and yells at the mayor of Sarajevo. And then the mayor goes on, kind of sweating bullets, and he gives a speech saying welcome, and just kind of acts as if nothing happened. And they decide to go visit some of the wounded of the motorcade. on their way back to leave the city. And so the communication doesn't happen to the drivers, and so they get confused and they end up driving down the wrong road. And then when they get to about this part here, they are told to turn around and get back on the right road. And just at that time, one of the other assassins, who basically thought that the attempt had succeeded and was just kind of roaming around the city, happens to be right there as the car is pulling up in front of him and turning around. He has a gun in his coat pocket. He pulls the gun out. He's within like 5 feet of the Archduke and his wife, starts firing at the Archduke, shoots and hits the Archduke, also hits his Archduke's wife, Sophia, and they shoot away. They wrestle Princip, the assassin's name, to the ground, and as they're crossing over the bridge, the Archduke ends up actually succumbing to his wounds, and eventually so does his wife, and they both die. And this particular incident is going to be a triggering mechanism for the start of World War I. The Austrian government blames Serbia for this particular attack. Even though Serbia was not directly tied to it, the Serbian nationalists that were in Sarajevo were, and so they kind of blame the Archduke's death on the Serbian government, and so they kind of threaten Serbia with some kind of military action, that we're gonna maybe attack you. And this brings us to our next aspect of this causes of World War I. So we have the assassination. What about alliances? Well, Europe was a tangled web of alliances leading up to World War I. You had all these countries that had formed these alliances. Many times they were secret alliances. They weren't very well known or publicized with different countries here. And so you see these different countries of Great Britain. There you have Italy. There you've got Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you've got Turkey, you've got Russia, and all of them are shaking hands, forming these different alliances. And the assassination is going to trigger these alliances to go into effect in kind of a chain reaction. So Austria blames Serbia for the death of Ferdinand and basically ends up declaring war on Serbia. And Germany, who is a close ally of Austria, pledges their support for the Austro-Hungarians, kind of the idea they're both kind of German nationalities. So this is kind of this nationalism that we were talking about earlier, this idea that there's this strong patriotic fervor that, their country is right and they're going to support their country. Russia steps in and says, we're going to protect our friends, the Serbs. We have an alliance with them, and they kind of have a pan-Slavic ethnicity. And so there's kind of a pan-Slavic nationalism of the Russians and Slavic people kind of binding and holding together of solidarity and alliances to kind of defend each other. So you have Germany and Austria on one side saying we're going to go to war with Serbia, and then you have Russia and Serbia kind of bonding together and saying, well, no, you're not. We're going to protect each other. And it should have probably stopped there, but it continues. Because Russia declared its support to Serbia, Germany declares war on Russia. France, which has an alliance with Russia, pledges their support for Russia. So Germany, therefore, declares war on France. So now Germany is at war with Russia, Serbia, and France. Germany decides to try to quickly take France out of the equation very, very early on in that summer. And so to get to France, they invade Belgium. And Belgium is kind of a neighboring border country between the German and French border. It's a little bit more of the lowlands, flatter region, and so German forces move over Belgium and through Belgium, basically taking over Belgium into France, where Belgium had an alliance with Great Britain, who also had a kind of an alliance with Russia as well. So Germany kind of declares its support for Belgium and declares war on Germany. And here, in just a matter of months, you have this world war. You have these very large, powerful nations in Europe all going to war with each other. And that's what we mean by these tangled web of alliances, how an assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand really kind of engulfs the whole of Europe through all these networks of alliances that create this conflict in Europe. So what should have just been a conflict between Austria and Serbia, because of these different alliances, very quickly included almost all of Europe. And so very quickly it becomes a whole continental conflict. Next big idea is militarism. Militarism is the large buildup of military forces. In the lead up to World War I, you had countries like Great Britain and Germany that were amassing large military forces. Great Britain had a huge navy. Germany was trying to kind of compete with that and build up their own very large navy. You can see with Germany here how much money they were total spending by Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, France, Britain, and Russia from 1870 to 1914. They spent about $153 billion combined. By the time you get to the beginning of World War I, They've now spent over $647 billion. That's a very large increase on military spending. If we look at percentage of increase, France increases its military spending by 10%. Britain increases it by 13%. Russia by 39%, and Germany by a whopping 73%. I mean, they are spending like mad to increase their military. And we call this militarism, the strong buildup of the military. And with this military buildup, the nations felt very confident in their ability to succeed very quickly if a war were to break out. And so they were very willing to actually engage their forces into military combat, especially countries like Germany and Russia, who felt that they had an army and they could be able to use it and be successful in doing so. So there was very little hesitation to get involved. So that's why some historians refer to this as militarism, as kind of a key central idea of this willingness to go into war very quickly over this assassination of a leader, which was a bad thing. But did countries need to actually go to physical war over it? Well, militarism gave them the belief that they were going to be successful if they did go to war, and that this would be a good war for them. We also look at this idea of imperialism, and again, imperialism is a term we've discussed earlier. Imperialism is this idea of going over and taking over and conquering countries in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Central and South America. And during this lead up to World War I, a lot of countries, especially Germany, felt a little bit left out, that they were not getting the colonies that the other European nations were getting. And so they were hopeful that by going to a war that they could gain those territories. And probably the largest imperial power in Europe at the time was the British Empire, where you see all the countries there in red represent nations that were under the control of Great Britain as colonies, so they had direct ties to the British Crown. Of course, you see the pink here are countries that used to be under the control of Great Britain, like the United States. And of course, they said the sun never set on the British Empire. So rule Britannia, right? The British Empire is a very, very large British Empire stretched globally around the world, and a lot of countries like Germany wanted to catch up and gain these territories as well, which led to some tensions that took place. Probably the biggest area where you see a lot of imperialism was probably in Africa, which was being very much carved up by the major countries of the French, the British, even the Belgians were getting involved, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Spanish, and of course you see the Germans here as well, that try to access some of these territories, which will, at the end of the war, will lose them to the British. But before the war, they also had these colonies as well. So there's kind of this built-up competition between the European nations to try to create as many colonies as possible. So we think about the causes of World War I. You got militarism, a strong buildup of military forces. You got alliances, this network of alliances that went into effect when nations began declaring war on each other. They stepped in and helped each other out, which expanded the conflict. You had imperialism, this idea of going over and trying to build as many empires and take over as many countries in Europe from Europeans from Africa and the Middle East. Nationalism, a strong sense of nationalist pride, the German nationalism, Slavic nationalism that kind of fed into this pride that our country's going to win. And of course you have the triggering effect of this whole thing, the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, led to these conflicts. And so we have this mania where you have militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, and assassination, where it kind of fed into this conflict known as World War I. So thanks for listening. As always, if you have questions, please make sure you come talk to your teacher, and I'll talk to you later.